basically. It's a great business model. So let's look at this business model in a little bit more detail. This is Blue Ocean from Apple, and what's interesting about Apple is I've been teaching this stuff long enough that Apple I've used now as an example of every different type of company. Right? So I used to teach it as a complete disaster, basket case. They could have been really good and they blew it. I know, isn't that funny? So I would teach the story about how in the, did you see which slide I got? No, I didn't put that slide. I would tell the story about how in the 1980s, it was them, they were the first ones that really came up with what we now recognize as a kind of Windows-based operating system. They were the first ones who really used a mouse. Up until then, it was C://. Remember that, the DOS prompt?
Yeah.
How old are you people? Remember this? And so they were the ones who really stepped forward with it, with a high-priced product, and then what we saw was other competitors, the PC-based competitors on the Wintel platform, so Windows and Intel together, gradually eroding the differentiation. So Apple used to be a great differentiation story, this terrific GUI, graphic user interface, terrific way of interacting with the computer, universally agreed upon to be a better technology, and yet, if you look, by the time you get to the early 90s, what you see is a lot more PC-based than Mac computers, because they basically lost that situation. Windows and Intel kind of caught up. So this now, I used to teach that as Apple as a disaster case. I actually used to teach Apple as stuck in the middle, where they weren't differentiated anymore compared to what you could do on Windows by the time you got to the late 90s, but they certainly were not a cost leader either. So they used to be an example of stuff. Now, they're number one innovator on Business Week's list of most innovative companies, and also doing extraordinarily well on almost any financial metric you can mention. But this story is from the mid-2000s, and this is a group of MBA students who did a presentation to me, and they did the presentation, and it was all about the exciting launch of a new product called the iPod, which at the time, we hadn't really kind of wrapped our heads around. It's not that long ago. I'm not that old, right? It's not that long ago. And this is straight from their presentation. So we go back now 5, 6, 7 years. And the global personal computer market, they were describing this as the red ocean. And they had 180 million units in 2004. The Wintel platform has 98, at that time, 98% market share. Now, okay, Apple was the next biggest. Macintosh was the next biggest platform after that. But 98% is clearly dominant. The key hardware vendors, Dell, HP, Gateway, and the key operating system vendor was Microsoft. Still is in lots of ways, but it's not quite as dominant. So this is the red ocean. And then you've got Apple, and they've got part of their businesses in the red ocean, and this is computers. Apple's red ocean business, so the Macintosh personal computers at the time, it was the PowerPC, PowerBook, iBook, iMac, and Mini Mac. About 3 million units in 2004. 3 million, they're a lot higher than that now. About 2% of the total market. The market focused creative professionals, education, and home computing. Now, if I look around this room, I think at least half of you have Apple gadgets in front of you. In fact, I see more Apple gadgets on the tables in front of you than I do of other gadgets, and I've gone the same way. Right? I was a PC user back in this time period, and I've ended up being part of this. So this is their red ocean business, and honestly, they were losing the fight there. Losing the fight. And they were getting to the point where, yes, then they started allowing Intel chips, and then they started allowing that you could run through, what's it called, boot camp or parallels, you could start running Windows operating system on your Mac. They made it all so that, and the differentiation was less and less and less and less differentiated, and hoping that people would still be willing to pay a higher price because of this kind of design image, and also because of some of the specific programs for creative professionals and education. They're not doing very well in this red ocean at this time period. Then they start with this blue ocean. They start with Macintosh as a digital hub. And it started off with the iPod and iTunes. And they had other plans. It's funny, I like using this slide now, because iMedia became iMovie. iTablet, I mean, it took a long time for the iTablet they were talking about in 2005 to become the reality. We now know the iPad has been a very, very commercially successful product. iVoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol. Skype has done very well in that world, but Apple does have FaceTime, which is doing reasonably well. And then, so thinking of Mac as a digital hub, music, iTunes, movies, the iDVD is the iMovie, camcorder, remember those things, those separate? You know, we don't use those anymore either, right? So on the phone. Anybody who still use a camcorder? Separate? But you know, you can see the point here, really reconceiving what the computer does. Like, who would have guessed that the winner in digital music would be a computer company? That needed them to rethink the market boundaries. Instead of thinking of themselves as a computer company, thinking of themselves as this digital hub. And so what you get is, as Torsten pointed out here, one of the reasons they make so much money these days, it's not just the reverse razor model with iTunes and iPod. Of course, iPhones are not even thought of in this time. This is before we really imagined that smartphones would be possible. So iPhones are not there, but of course we know that that's a very commercially successful product as well. And what you've got is these blue ocean businesses encouraging people to start buying the other pieces of the infrastructure. So you start off buying an iPod, and then the next time you replace your laptop, you end up buying a Mac. Or you buy a phone, and then you end up buying an iPad rather than the Playbook, which is the BlackBerry version. So you start seeing this, and they were calling it as consumer grooving. Like, the consumers kind of got into the mode of this digital hub and started to respond on the blue ocean side, and that helped swirling back into their red ocean and increase their computer sales. So this is actually the reason I use this. They call it the purple ocean swirl, which is totally made up by this MBA group. But the idea is that you've got this big red ocean and then this blue ocean on the side of it that can help generate sales back into your red ocean. You can get this kind of this swirling effect. It's a very useful way of thinking about it. So Apple created its own increasing returns. There's high upfront costs, but once you start getting into these network effects on the hardware, software side, on the services side, you get more and more and more purchases. So every time somebody buys an iPad, they go into the App Store, then they go into the bookstore, you know, and it starts kind of swirling away. So Apple's share, even this now is a little, well, 2010, so 2 years ago, Apple's share of the US market for computers grew 34%. In 2009, remember 2009, we were in a recessionary toilet? Yeah? 34% in that time period. An estimated 1.4 million Macs. And Apple now has 8% of the US market. That's gone higher. We're now at 12 or more percent of the US market. So completely transformed from being stuck in the middle, reinvented the business model, thinking of themselves as something other than a strict computer company. Does that make sense? So it's partly talked about in the article, and that's where you brought the idea from. And this is what's talked about in the Johnson, Christensen, Cagney. So put it another way, this is their language. This is straight from the paper. You can go and get the details later. I'm not going to go through the details, but just to put what I'm saying into their language. Thinking about it from the customer value proposition. What job does our product do? How does the product do a different job? What job does the customer need to be fulfilled? How does our product or service help them do that job? How does it help them do that job differently from our competitors? What are they willing to pay for? And it turns out that iTunes, people were willing to pay for digital downloads. They just needed a way to do it. People are willing to pay to stream video. People are willing to pay to do something. Okay, yes, it's free as well. But people are willing to pay for these things. We just need to find a way to access that. So what is it in terms of what's the target customers, the job to be done, and the offering to satisfy that? Once you've got the customer value proposition, if you're thinking of this in blue ocean language, remember we're always looking at the value curve from the customer's point of view. So it's not a million miles away. It's a similar way of thinking about it. Then thinking about the profit formula. And we know that the profit formula for Apple was this reverse razor. So you're making the money out of the content as much as out of the hardware. They do make money out of hardware. We showed some of those numbers, I think, earlier in this class, didn't I? Yeah. So you make money out of the hardware, but they also make a lot of money out of the associated software. And then the other pieces that we need are the key resources and the key processes. So key resources needed to deliver the value proposition, including people, technology, equipment, information channels, partnerships, alliances, brand, that sort of thing. Key processes, things like design processes, product development, rules and metrics. Where have we seen this stuff before? resource-based view, resources and capabilities, resources and capabilities. So if we're thinking about resources and processes, this is another way of saying, and we need to think about which are the critical resources and capabilities we need to be able to deliver. And we know, because we were alert in our last session, that we're going to worry about things like value, rarity, inimitability, organised to be exploited. So that's the point here. So this is actually saying very, very similar things to what we said before, just put it in a different way. There's a lot of good examples in that paper. I actually kind of like that paper. There's a lot of good examples about different ways about how traditional companies reimagined their future. We talked about it a bit too with Fujifilm, how Fujifilm is now involved in cosmetics. Because they didn't think of themselves as a camera company, they thought of themselves as a chemicals company. And they were able to move from there in a way that Kodak wasn't. Okay. So, now I've got some slides that previously, actually I had them at the back of one of the other presentations earlier on in the semester, and I skipped through them and said I'll come back to them another time. Here I am, I'm coming back to them. I decided to put them in here instead. So a couple of key questions. You know, this all sounds great about a new business model innovation, but when will a new idea actually take hold? When can we predict that, for example, a better place model is going to take hold? So let's just a few examples. So this is Shia Gassi's better place model. This is the iPad course, thinking about why is it that we've adopted that. This, scarily enough, is actually real. You can buy them in these jetpacks now. It's about $80,000. Terrifyingly, you do not need a pilot's license to fly it. In the US, thankfully, they're totally illegal here. You can just imagine, right? This sounds like, you know, some kind of crazy new product, some crazy new business model that goes around it. But when is it? Some of these things turn out to be crazy plans and never take off, and some of them actually do take off. Now, we weren't completely convinced about Better Place in this class. I've had other classes that think it's great, and that this is the way to go, and that in fact, he's really onto something and he's going to be a very wealthy man. So 6 ways to stick. This is research I'm doing with a colleague of mine in Calgary. When will a new business model or value model take hold? Well, the first way is to appeal to customers. And this is the headline way, right? Think about the customer value proposition. There's lots of stories here about how a new innovation or a new value proposition, if you like, started being pulled into the market because customers valued it. And the story that's told here is around Honda entry into the US. Have I told this story before in this class? I told it recently. I don't think it was with you. No, Honda, no, entry to the US, motorcycles. Doesn't ring a bell. Okay, good. So, Honda, let's go back to, say, the 80s. Honda, Japanese company, core competence is in engine technology. Right? So engines for motorcycles, lawnmowers that you, this is a US story, so this is the type of lawnmower you sit on it and you drive it around, right? This is not a London lawnmower where you could just use a pair of nail scissors or something to cut the lawn. So, traditional core competence in engine technology, and no intention really of being involved in the US car market. They did some exporting to the US. They exported snowblowers, so you know the things you push along to get snow off the sidewalk, and they exported lawnmowers, that type of thing, but no intention to really move into transportation. But they had these cub motorcycles, these kind of small motorcycles in Japan, and gradually it kind of became this kind of cool thing in the States where there was cub motorcycle clubs, and these real enthusiasts really enjoyed these cub motorcycles, and sort of started importing them to Japan, from Japan to the States, and sort of Honda kind of cottoned on and thinks, interesting. We have customers there we didn't even know we had. They're finding a way around the import and export controls to be able to access these things. Maybe we should start exporting these directly to the States. So they start exporting these kind of motorcycles to fulfill a customer need. And then they start with the smaller motorcycles, and then it's the larger motorcycles. And before you know it, they're exporting small cars, and before you know it, it's a very large